Hi, I'm Femi OK. On today's bonus edition of The Stream, South Africa's Nomzamo Mbatha, a UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador and one of the stars of Coming to America, is coming to The Stream. It is such a great interview. Make sure you stick around right to the end to see it. We take a close look at the audio app Clubhouse and ask whether the freewheeling conversations it promotes could be dangerous in countries that restrict free speech. And there have been multiple reports of content from Palestinians just disappearing online. The Stream brought together three experts who had no doubt that some of the biggest social media platforms in the world are suppressing Palestinian voices.
We are not paranoid. We are not paranoid about what happens on social media over the past, let's say, 7-8 years. We've seen evidence, clear evidence of censorship, of accounts being taken down, of double standards in the way Facebook or Twitter deals with a Palestinian news page and an Israeli propaganda military page, for example. We've seen those double standards and we've seen the evidence over the past years. When we say there are issues and there are problems, they can't be dismissed as technical issues. The censorship is real because we know the evidence is there, and it's always changing and shifting forms, but we're not paranoid. The censorship is always there.
Palestinian activists and journalists and users of social media have been decrying the discrimination that they're facing on those platforms for years. But I personally, someone who has worked and wrote a lot about this topic, I have not seen anything of this scale. It's so brazen at this point and so incredible. It's beyond censorship. It's digital repression. Social media companies are actively suppressing the narrative of Palestinians and their allies who are sharing solidarity content with what's happening in Palestine or documenting human rights violations and war crimes.
There are a systematic efforts to silence Palestinians on the online space. The Israeli government is trying with all its power to silence Palestinians, either through the voluntary takedowns where the Israeli cyber unit is sending requests to the social media companies. For example, in 2019, Israel had made 19,000 requests to the social media companies regarding the content takedown, Palestinian content takedown. And in 2020, the number only continued to rise.
Everything you saw just there was broadcast live, but there were more revelations to come about the digital battle Palestinians are currently fighting online. So here's the conversation that Jalal, Marwa, Mono and I had behind the scenes after that episode's aired.
The Israeli intelligence service, they were threatening and intimidating activists in Jerusalem, and they were telling them that we will hold you accountable later on. So they were threatening the activists, either who's going to Al-Aqsa Mosque by using the GPS. So the Israeli intelligence is using GPS to spy on people, and then they send them a short message that we are going to hold you accountable later on. And there is other cases where the Israeli intelligence service, they send messages to people calling them not to post things on social media, and by doing them they are threatening the social media activists and the human rights defenders.
The Israeli Shabak service introduced this new system during the COVID crisis to track every mobile phone held by every Palestinian.
Not even you.
Palestinian. Every mobile phone held by anyone, and associating the number with a chip, with an ID card, with a name. The tracking location, the tracking system it's always been there, of course, but it was legitimized by the Knesset, by the Israeli parliament, and it became law, and the services were using it and abusing it during the COVID period. And we believe that introducing such a method, such a measure for pandemic purposes is really, it would be really easily abused by the Shabak services, which really want to intimidate and track people. And that's probably the source of such a messaging.
What worries me the most is that, it's not just takedown. They are muzzling users. You are being muzzled without knowing you're being muzzled. And that's, the the tip of how you can function as a non-transparent company and lie to your users, even though they have made many public commitments to uphold human rights. Facebook especially, they had a corporate human rights policy issued a couple of months ago in March. Yeah. But when you see their commitments versus the actual actions, it's two different stories. Okay. And I'm glad, because finally we can say with full confidence that you are discriminate, you're biased, and you are suppressing the Palestinian narrative. There's no other way. There's no one that can say, well, it's just a bunch of accounts, it's a technical glitch. And last point I want to add to this is that, for social media, it hasn't only just helped us penetrate into mainstream media and the Palestinian narrative. Actually, forget about the Palestinian narrative, just facts on the ground, the facts of apartheid, the facts of genocide, the facts of ethnic cleansing. They are finally breaking through, and people are talking about it publicly without fear. And it's also saving people's lives. It saved the people in Sheikh Jarrah and elsewhere from being evicted from their homes without, there's so much that could happen in the dark, and having social media and live streaming and documenting has helped in that sense. And it's really disappointing, and I would say disgraceful and disgusting, that social media companies, even though they claim that they're the voice of all people, they're actively suppressing people who need those platforms the most.
We stay in the digital world to unpack how the audio chat platform Clubhouse is being used globally. Once it's loaded onto your phone, you can browse through thousands of rooms looking for conversations to listen into, take part in, or even moderate. During the show, guests Nagar Mortazavi, Melissa Chan and Mark Owen Jones talked about the difficulties of using an app that promotes free speech in countries that don't encourage open dialogue. After the broadcast, I asked them to dish on some of their best conversations that they'd listened into. Welcome to Overheard in Clubhouse. Mark's going to get us started.
The conversation I heard was a very interesting discussion about gender roles and sexuality in Gulf countries, and I thought that was kind of fascinating because I'm a sort of professor, and we do talk about this in class in a very kind of private space where after a time when people feel space, but to hear people talking and sharing these experiences from the Gulf on Clubhouse in what is a very open forum really kind of I thought was really nice. It was refreshing. I can't go into much detail. I want
to ask for more detail here.
It's one or two things, but it was. I think what was.
Were we talking about sex education? Were we talking about sexuality? What? Give me a little bit more.
LGBT rights in particular,
which you cannot talk about in the Middle East, right? You can't.
No, it is a red line in most countries.
Overheard in Clubhouse, Melissa, the one story that stands out for you.
I think it does have to go back to what's happening in Xinjiang and the engagement between Uyghurs and Han Chinese. And there was this one moment where a Han Chinese woman, I don't remember if she was in China or out, but she said, I want to tell everyone in this room that I feel heartbroken over what my government is doing to you Uyghurs who are listening. And I wish there was something I could do to change it. And I think a lot of Uyghurs who've gone through so much trauma needed to hear that from an ethnic Chinese. It was really intense. And you heard, them talking to each other. I just remember that. And I could go on, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nagar, Overheard in Clubhouse.
Well, I would also say it has to do, it's the Me Too conversation. There's been a Me Too moment, sort of a new movement over the past couple of year or so that started on Twitter, but then it was mostly, anonymous accounts, a lot of he said, she said, we're not sure, how can we trust this? But then suddenly Clubhouse came, and there were these rooms of hours and hours of discussion, and people would just drop in with their own name, their own voice, and start telling stories of these Me Too issues about celebrities, prominent musicians, artists that would just mind-blowing. And it wasn't at all possible on Twitter, and it wasn't possible with media because the media is very careful when it comes to these Me Too stories for legal reasons. They don't want to be sued. They don't want to just put people on air to talk about these things. But it seems like Clubhouse gave a platform to a lot of Iranian women and a newfound courage, because you would see various victims drop into a room and each of them talking about the issue would give courage to someone else coming up saying, I've been living with this for 10 years, but now that I heard so-and-so talk about it and hear her voice shake or her cry, whatever, I want to talk about it too. So it's been really groundbreaking when it comes to the Me Too movement in Iran.
I am going to give us all 30 seconds to do this in. Today I was on Clubhouse and I spoke on Clubhouse. I had so much fun. So they promoted me up there and I got to talk. And they were like, and now we're kicking you back to the audience because you're too chatty. And it was so much fun. I loved it. But it was for research. But I had a blast. The reasons I look a lot. Mark, have you spoken and what was that like?
Yes, I spoke, but only because I was invited to a panel. I've been too afraid to volunteer my perspectives in a random room. It's just too scary. It's just too scary.
All right.
Heckled, you know?
Melissa, have you spoken?
Yeah, I have. Although in the rooms that I described, I was, silent because I didn't think it was my place. I was a reporter, really sort of listening in on these conversations. But I've spoken on more panel-like stuff and more official stuff.
I ran a room once.
Ooh, look at Nika running a room.
That was hard. And I've spoken on panels, and sometimes when I go into rooms, they try to bring me up, and I don't have anything to add, so I keep rejecting. I just feel so bad, and I eventually have to leave the room because they just do it so many times. But yeah, it's been an interesting experience.
And now for something completely different. Solar geoengineering is a very niche area of climate science that has scientists arguing with each other. Cue the planes. So this is the theory, this is how it works. You release into the stratosphere material that reflects sunlight back up into the stratosphere, and solar energy as well, which means that theoretically down on the Earth, we could be much cooler despite global warming. This is a theory. So researchers are not exactly sure what the repercussions of solar geoengineering might be. For instance, how do you control the cooling? Who gets to make those decisions? And right at the end of the debate that we had on the stream, Anjali Vishwamohanan brought up another major issue.
So I think it's important for people to know that research on solar geoengineering currently is being dominated by a group of privileged institutions that is based in the global north. So the only constructive way forward on this is to establish an international governance mechanism that is sort of developed through international participation.
So that's where we ended the live discussion with an assertion that scientists in the global north are trying to make decisions that could harm people in the global south. That's a conversation I had to finish. Anjali continued her point after the broadcast.
So, I think it's a really interesting time to have this conversation about solar geoengineering as we are sort of going through a global pandemic that highlights the vulnerabilities of communities that are majorly located in the global south. It sort of highlights the fact that a majority of the population that's based in the global south sort of leads a very hand-to-mouth existence, and there isn't enough state capacity to really help them out. So, we really need to be taking these uncertainties and risks that affect these communities more seriously. So when it comes to solar geoengineering, in all of this research that is happening, all of the uncertainties and risks should be discussed, it should be highlighted, and we should not be brushing past them in discussions and in research papers. So with that aim in mind, it is really important to create communities where we are able to have open and critical conversations about developments in solar geoengineering. So to that extent, it is really important to have more voices on this issue. We need to have more voices from the global south. We need to have more young people involved in this conversation. We need to have more women involved in this conversation, and we need to keep it going.
I'm guessing we all 100% agree. Kelly and I have both been involved in an organization that has tried to fund research across the global south. I've been involved now for 20 years trying to reach out to people. I think my first trip to India was on this topic was more than 10 years ago. So that's exactly what needs to happen. Every single thing that Anjali said is right. I think maybe one thing to say is that the fact is solar geoengineering research is more or less the same as climate science. It's very similar. And climate science is unjustly concentrated in the rich countries. And so it's not surprising that that's what's happening here. And what we need to do is find ways to get voices from the poor countries legitimately into this conversation in a way that matters.
Well, I wanted to say in Silver Lining, we recently launched a global youth initiative, which focuses on young climate professionals from around the world, and particularly the global south, so that we could try to get them engaged directly with the experts that we deal with, both in the policy sphere and the science sphere. But ultimately, to Anjali's point about, or her analogy with coronavirus, one of the realities of the situation is that the rich countries have resources to accelerate innovation and science quickly against some of these big systemic problems. And so for us, the question is, how do we leverage some of those rich country resources to make things, to innovate and help make things available to the rest of the world, particularly where we have a serious safety crisis that's emerging that's going to hit the developing world harder. So we're hopeful that there's a possibility for rich countries to invest resources in a way that is open and accessible to others, and that allows them to participate in the decision about what ultimately to do. I realize that's a tricky line to walk, but that's how we're thinking about it.
And now to one of my favorite conversations from the Stream's Instagram Live series. South African actor Nomzamo Mbatha spoke to my colleague Josh Rushing recently about her career and the story behind landing a major role in the film Coming to America. One viewer on Instagram Live said, "This is a beautiful interview." I have to say, I completely agree. Take a look.
So did you go for a number of American movies before you landed Coming to America?
No, it was my first one. It was my...
You're charmed.
I had...
You're charmed. Just some people walk through life charmed.
Yeah, I've done so many other auditions, sheesh, and had gone for so many go-sees and so many meetings with casting directors and selling myself, like, come on, give me a chance. And then it just happened, you know. I was in Abu Dhabi shooting some content for the UN, and I got the call from my agent, and he was like, you gotta get on the flight. It's for Coming to America, and this is the role. You know, you can send a tape, but I would say be in the room.
So you're on set remaking a classic comedy. You're with one of the largest stars in the world, and you mentioned you had a bit of imposter syndrome then too?
I did.
Talk about it.
I never thought that I would experience it. You know, it's a new thing. And I'm grateful that I've been able to be honest about it and speak out about it, because I guess nobody speaks out about it. You know, everybody puts on this confidence suit. And for me, I guess it was a crew of almost 300 people, cast and crew of almost 300 people. You're shooting at the Tyler Perry Studios, which have just been, you know, opened last week, and all the biggest Hollywood royalties have been in attendance. And then you are surrounded by, you know, Hollywood royalty itself that has been relevant for over 3 decades, longer than I've been on this earth. And you have been tasked to be a part of this and bring all the charm and bring all the talent and believe that you deserve to be there. That's a lot of responsibility. And I remember just having a conversation with myself at the end of this particular day that we were shooting. It was one of the first days of shoot. It was actually the second day. And it was Eddie Murphy's first day. And so I go to my trailer and I'm changing, and it's the end of the day, and I'm changing, and I'm thinking to myself, why do you feel like this? Why? Anyone who would be in your shoes would feel so full. Anyone who would be here would feel so grateful and be floating and be boasting about it. Why are you playing small? Why are you diminishing yourself like this? And it was just on my mind, and I thought, the question, I guess, when it comes to imposter syndrome is, why me? And I guess the retaliation of the fight in here should be, why not you? If not, who? And but the following day, Sherry Headley, who plays Queen Lisa, she pulled me to the side because we were doing some group picture, and I was just like in the back, like, and she kept on pushing me forward. Nomzamo, go in the front. Go to the front. And I was like, no, I'm fine here. To the side, and she had her hands on my shoulders, and she said, I have been where you are. You're playing small. Don't do that. Don't do that. And I remember just like bawling my eyes out because I hadn't said anything, but clearly there was something that she felt in my energy. And I just bawled my eyes out, and she said, you're playing small. Stop playing small. I've been where you are. You deserve to be here. You deserve to be here. And I was like, how did you tell? That's how I was feeling. And she says, don't say anything. I can tell.
Such wisdom.
Yeah, she's like, you don't need to say anything. I can tell.
So I know that you're a UN Goodwill Ambassador, and you've done a lot of work in Africa, the refugee camps in Malawi. I've been to many refugee camps myself, reporting all over the world, particularly in the Middle East. And I often found myself scratching my head on why I've been so lucky in my life, and maybe someone there hasn't, and trying to understand how our lives have the same value, and we are experiencing the same existence on Earth, but you know, the existence of living in LA when everything is going right, and the existence of living in a Syrian refugee camp couldn't be more different, almost as if they're different lives on different planets. And I don't think I've ever fully reconciled it. I don't think I fully have understood it, but I know as I kind of go through this journey of being a journalist and thinking about it, it's one of the things I'm always trying to reconcile and always trying to understand. How do you reconcile that?
I love that perspective. I actually speak about it in my TED Talk about the dualities that exist, right? But I don't think I too have gotten to that point of reconciling with it. I remember this one time, it must have been February, and I had just been to South Sudan, which is, you know, still a very much, you know, war-torn country, and with all the tensions that they are. This is 2018 or 19, I think. And I had just and you know, I had gone to Maban in South Sudan, which is the most remote refugee camp in the world, in the entire world, most remote. And I had just come back, and as I'm landing in Cape Town, and I'm supposed to host this huge polo event with the most elites. Now, you cannot even imagine the contrast of it all. I had a lump in my throat throughout that entire day, hosting it. Just looking
hosting it.
And telling everybody, raise your champagne, ladies and gentlemen, let's toast. But something was in here, and something was right here, just this heavy burden and this utter guilt, stupid guilt, utter guilt of having experienced what I had experienced and seen.
What's coming up for you with projects?
Well, what's coming up with me with projects? I'm working on a documentary currently. I guess, you know, with all the work that I've been doing with UNHCR, I think this is the time now to put together a documentary of my experience, of people that I've met. And even so, not, you know, again, for me, I don't believe it's 1 in 50 million refugees or 1 in 8 million refugees. It's one refugee 8 million times. And so how do we narrow that into the lens? And so I'm working on that. I'm really excited about. I'm about to get on set with a very, very awesome gentleman who's done a lot of kick-ass films for decades. And I get to be his scene partner for a lot of that as I take the lead on a film that's about, I mean, we're about to announce it in the next couple of days or probably next week. So I'm really excited about that. And I just continue to do the work. I continue to do the work.
Nomzamo Mbatha and Josh Rushing. And Nomzamo did mention she had a major film project coming up. And Josh tried to get that information out of her. He tried to extract it. Even with all of his fault lines experience, he couldn't prise that information out of Nomzamo. But we promise you, when we hear, we will put it on our stream social media platforms. And that is our show for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.